Welcome to part 2 of the editing for bird photography, and what we're looking at in this shot, this again is taken with my R6 camera and the f11 600mm lens, and this is typically the type of shot I'll get in reasonable light, so it's, you know, that's what I love about the lens. It's really high quality for these type of images. So what don't I like about it? Well, I love the shot, but I think there's just a little bit too much distraction going on in the water. And at f11 we are getting a little bit more in focus. But also I'd like to give it more of a fine art type look. So something a bit more stylized, something a little bit more arty than just a plain old, you know, picture of a very nice grebe, but we want to make it look better. So what I'm basically going to do is to create a creative blur on the image on the background and in the foreground to give that effect like it was taken with a 500mm lens wide open, say at f4 or something like that, to give that effect to that big lens effect. So what we need to do first of all is we look at the layers, and I'm going to duplicate this first layer, and I'm going to click in there so I can rename the layer, and I'm going to rename the layer and call it blur. I'm not going to do anything else with that yet, and the reason I'm giving them names is because basically it just stops a little bit of confusion when we're looking at the layers. I know that I'm going to come back to that layer and I'm going to blur that, and that's going to be the layer with that effect on. Now I'm going to right click and duplicate that layer. So obviously it's not blurred yet because we haven't done anything, but I'm going to call this layer selection bird. So we've now got 3 layers. We've got the background layer, we've got the blur layer, and we've got the selection bird. And that is what we're going to do first of all. We're going to make a selection of this bird. So using a similar technique to what we used before, but we may have to refine it a little bit more in this case. So I'm going to go to select subject, and we'll just see what that comes up with. Now it's made a reasonable selection. I'm not really too bothered about the bottom half of the image, so the bottom half of the selection really doesn't matter, and you'll see why later on. But what is important is the back of the bird and the head of the bird, because we're going to blur the background behind the head and the back of the body there. Okay, so I'm not happy with that selection because it hasn't got all the feather detail. So I can click on any of the selection tools, doesn't really matter which one, any of these selection tools, and we will see the word select and mask, and we click on that, and that opens up the dialog for the select and mask part of the program. Now what I'm going to do first of all, let's just try clicking the refine hair button, and that has actually done quite a good job. You can see now that it has actually got all of this area around there. So where we've got part like that and around the head, just by simply clicking that refine hair button, has made a really good selection. But I would just want to go over the back there because there were some water droplets on the back there, and I want to bring those back in. So I'm going to make the brush bigger slightly, and I can do that using the bracket keys on the keyboard. So to the left of your enter key, the 2 parenthesis and curly bracket keys that you've got there, the one on the left will make the brush larger, and the one on the right will make the brush larger, and the one on the left will make it smaller. So something about like that. Okay, so what I will now want to do is to do the back of this part there. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on that. Just want to get this water bubble a little bit better there. So I'm going to go to this tool, the refine edge brush tool. Just going to get right on the edge there and just click, and you can see if I get on the edge That is just bringing that in. Just making sure you just got the edge of the brush there and you're well into the background. And I'll just do that around this edge, just one click. Making sure I'm on the edge. Just to bring that area in, and I may just click on the third brush down, which is the simple brush tool, and using a small brush, make sure it's on plus on the options bar, and I'm just going to physically paint in these bubbles. So I think they're a main part of the picture, so I'll just click once at a time. Or just paint that area in there. Okay, so that's fine. I'm happy with that selection. Just a little bit down here. I don't think actually that won't matter, but I'll just paint it in anyway. That's fine. A little bit on the neck there. That's okay. Everything else is looking good. So the part on that that really works with this crested head was this new button called the Refine Hair. That made a really good selection. Now I'm just checking over because I can see a little bit there that's coming through, so I need to make sure with this add brush still on, I'm making sure that all this area inside that is opaque and selected. And now we're looking good. Where we want the output to go, so at the bottom there where we've got output 2, I want a new mask, a new layer mask with a layer as well. So a new layer with layer mask, click on there, then click on OK, and that will now give us, if we look at the layers, we have now got this selection of the bird copy. Okay, now we need to look at our layers now. What I want to do now is I want to blur this background. And I'm going to click on the blur layer to do that. So we're going to blur this layer. Now when we blur it, obviously we've got this selection at the top with the bird on. If I just hide everything, we've got that on this top layer. I'll go down to the blur layer and I'll click that eye so we can see the layer. That is what we've got on that layer. But the thing is, on this layer, we've also got the bird. And if I blur it, I'm going to get the bird blurred as well. And that's not going to look too good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection around this area of the bird and maybe the shadow as well. So I'm going to get a lasso tool. I'm going to make sure the feather is on 0. And I'm going to draw around the outside of the bird like this, and this bit of shadow or reflection rather, just like that. And I'm now going to get rid of this, so we're going to create a fill effect on this. So what I need to do is to hold down the shift key and press the backspace key on the keyboard once, and this fill contents comes up. Now the contents must be on content aware, so if it isn't, click on the box, make sure you've got content aware, and then click on OK. And it will look like it's done absolutely nothing when it's completed. You may see something up and down here. We'll just see what that does. It's taken a while because it's quite a big image, this. There we go. So if we hide this top layer now, you can see that it's took away the bird. So when I blur this now, what's going to happen is I'm not going to get that bird smudged across the picture. It's basically replaced it with water. So we need to get rid of the selection. So select, deselect. And I'm going to duplicate this blur layer. So I'm going to right click and duplicate the layer. So now we've got quite a few layers going on. This one really doesn't matter too much, one above, but we've now got blur copy, and I'm going to blur this one. So I'm going to go to filter, blur, and I'm going to use a Gaussian blur. And I'm going to drag this up reasonably high. Just going to go to about there, click on OK. Now that looks totally artificial, we know that, we're not worried about that. And then I'm going to go to the one behind it, so the blur, the original blur layer. Now what I'm going to do is hide the layer above it. So I'm going to click on the eye on the one above it, so I can now see this effect. And we're going to create a different blur on this one. We're going to go to filter, blur, and we're going to use motion blur. Now when we click on this, what I want to make sure is that the angle is on 0. So if it isn't, click in there, delete that and type in 0. So if it's something like that, highlight the text in the box and just type in 0, and that will then make the blur go horizontally across the image. This is what we want. And I just want to create something. I'm smoothing that water down just a little bit. Then I click on OK. It's still not looking realistic. It will do when we finish. So we've got that blur. We can forget this blur copy for the moment. Remember, we've got this different blur going on with that. But now what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this selection of the bird once more. Now I could actually use this one below. So I'm going to, no, I'll just delete that one. So I'm going to right click and delete that layer. You hear my brain working here, which is the best option. There's different ways of doing this. Okay, so I'm going to click on this one now. We've got the selection bird copy. I'm going to right click and duplicate that layer. Okay, so what we have got is the same layer twice with the selection of the bird on. Now I'm going to go to the one below it, so this original one. And what I want to do on this, I want to add some water. There isn't, basically, that's in focus going across there. And the way we're going to do that is, remember, we've got this mask and white is opaque, so it allows me to see something. And black is transparent, so we can see through that layer, through the sharp layer where we got the bird, and we can see the water that's blurred underneath. And we're going to bring some of the water back on this layer by creating some white going across the image where we want it. So I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, the rectangular marquee tool, making sure that I'm on add to selection. So the second one on the options bar, could be the first one, but make sure, I nearly always use the second one in most cases. And we need to put a feather on there. The feather for this image, and this is guessing really, I'm going to put quite a big feather on of about 80. So if you're working with an high quality image and it hasn't been cropped humongously, probably something around that's going to be okay. But if you do this and it doesn't work, just delete the layer and start again. So I'm going to make a selection. Now when you draw with this, make sure that you're outside of the actual picture so you can see the actual side of that. Now if you can't, click on the magnifying glass and just zoom out a little bit so you can. In fact, I'll do that. So I'll just click on that. I'm on the minus. And I'll just click once so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. And I go back to the marquee tool. Now I'm going to drag outside the box. And I'm going to come across here. Now, it may be you're not going to get it in the right place. But there's a trick to this. Holding the mouse button down without letting go. If you hold down the space bar, you can then move that selection to where you want. And we want it below the back and just on the front of the water here, something like that. So I'm going to let go, and now I've got this selection. Now what I want to do, remember what we're doing here, we're actually on the mask, we're not on the image, we're on the mask. And what I want to do is to make this opaque so we can actually see this part of the layer in focus. So to do that, we simply need the paint bucket tool, and making sure that we've got white as the foreground colour. All we need to do is to click in this area and then go to select, deselect, and you can see now what's happened. We have brought back, you can see the white bit on there, so we have brought back that focus on that layer. And we've also got that top one on there. Now we've got that on for a reason. It just gives more sharpness there, and if we do anything, we can lessen the effect of this if we wanted to. So we could use the opacity and take it down a little bit, or we can bring it up. But if we'd done that and we hadn't got this layer on the top, what would happen is you'd get sort of this effect. Let's just hide that layer. If we was to take this one down, the bird becomes transparent. So that is why we need this one on the top, and when we're on this second layer down, so the selection bird copy there, when we take that down, we've got full control. Okay, so actually probably want it all the way up in this case. We've now got this blur copy layer, which we can use if we want. Now I'm going to click the eye on that so we can see the effect. And that does give quite a nice effect actually. It gives that look that you know, a long lens would give. But if you want to lessen the effect, all we need to do is make sure that we're on this blur copy, which is the layer with that effect on. And then you can take the opacity down on the layer and get it exactly how you want it. So you've got full control over how much you put on there. We got full control. Let's just put this background layer on. So click the eye on there. If we hide this blur layer, we've got the original coming through. So you could even go to this layer and you can take that down if you wanted to. Now I probably wouldn't, but it just shows you've got full control over everything now on the blur effect that you want. So I probably want that up all the way, and on this one I might want to go to about there. And now you can see the separation that we've got in the image. You could just flatten the layer at that point, but I'm just going to show that by I click on that layer there and hold down the shift key and click on the top and show all of them. And then I'm just going to click on the folder tool, which will put all those layers inside that folder. And if I click the eye, we can see the original image, and now we can see the effect that we've created. And I quite like that. I think it just makes it look more arty, more fine art type look, and also it gives that effect of using that really long, you know, lens. If you've got a 500mm and you're shooting wide open, say at f4, if you can afford it, 2.8, that's the effect that you would get. It would be blurred, you would just get a line of focus going across the bird and the part that you've actually focused on. The rest would diffuse, and you've got full control over how much diffusion you put on that by controlling the blur and whatever. So I'm just going to go to layer, flatten image, and there we go. The image is now complete. So you could save that. That would take you back to Lightroom, and you can do whatever you want with it. Okay, so that ends that lesson. So a different approach, totally different approach in that. And you can see that, you know, the first image I got was quite bad, you know, but we got a nice image out of it. But we're shooting in completely different conditions, low light, shooting through a window, and now we're in normal conditions, out in the daylight, where that lens is obviously going to work much better. And I'm talking specifically about this lens. This is for any type of lens that you've used to capture images. Like, it's even if you've used, if you've got a 500mm and you want a bit more blur on it, you can create these effects.